Hello Flow team, and welcome to another episode of Flow Lounge. This week we're talking about the new National Cup. Now you may have noticed last week that the MTBA Mountain Bike Australia came out and announced that the National Series, for so long the peak level of national competition in Australia, is no more. It is now being replaced with the new National Cup. We had plenty of questions about this, so we got on the blower to Shane Coppin, who is the CEO of MTBA, to ask him a few questions about the National Cup, how it's going to run and what it all means. Now before we jump into that, a little bit of background. Obviously the National Series has been on the wane for some time, as has a lot of racing across Australia. Obviously there are more disciplines than ever. In the past you probably didn't have Enduro competing with downhill, for instance, so attracting essentially the same kind of competitors to two different events. There's obviously more events than ever too, so numbers are having to be spread around a little bit more thinly. Plus people are travelling more just to ride, and so people are putting their money into that rather than necessarily going racing. So there's a bunch of different reasons, and the National Series is not immune to any of those. So what is the National Cup? Well, in comparison to the National Series, which was its own distinct series of events that used to sit on top of all the other events in the mountain bike landscape, having to kind of get itself sandwiched in between them all at that very busy beginning part of the year, the National Cup actually looks to work with existing events that are already out there on the mountain bike calendar and incorporate them into a national level competition. So those events now have the ability or the choice to join up to the National Cup. They can have themselves listed as an event at a variety of different tiers, which we'll touch on later. There are 6 different tiers of competition within the National Cup. So riders who take part in those events are going to be allocated points. The number of points that they get will depend on the tier of the event that they've been taking part in. And those points count towards a national ranking overall, with one person being declared the National Cup winner in each discipline at the end of the year. So why have MTBA done this? Well, it's all about increasing access and participation in national level competition. In the past, the National Series was always held at that first 3-month period of the year. It's always quite a busy time of year for most people. It's also fairly geographically concentrated in the southeast corner of Australia. It was just generally very hard for people to get to National Series events, whether that's for work reasons, travel reasons, family reasons. It certainly wasn't a convenient kind of competition for most people to get involved in, and it certainly wasn't always Australia-wide. Now, spreading the events across the entire nation, allowing events from wherever to get involved in the National Cup, really obviously increases the geographical reach of the national competition. Suddenly you're going to be able to get people taking part in national competition who just wouldn't have physically been able to do so in the past. So obviously spreading the events out across the entire calendar year makes a big difference too in terms of helping people get to those events. Thirdly, it also helps with identifying talent. So for those same reasons, the National Series wasn't always particularly accessible to younger riders, but now with a truly national framework, we're hopefully going to be able to identify talented riders who just couldn't get to National Series events before. With this centralised National Cup system, we're going to see their names coming up. They're going to be brought to the attention of MTBA, and we're going to see them getting high national rankings, and hopefully that will help with identifying all kinds of talent who otherwise might have slid underneath the radar. From the perspective of a club or an event promoter, the National Cup is going to allow them to be part of something bigger, which I think is actually a pretty cool kind of thing. Having your event associated with a Cup Series certainly adds a bit of vibe to it that might not have been there otherwise. And finally, this whole new format financially is going to be a lot more affordable for clubs to get themselves involved in a national level competition. If you wanted to host a National Series round in the past, it was pretty expensive to do so, whereas taking part in the National Cup starts from just a couple of $100, and we'll touch on the costs a little bit more later as well. So in terms of the styles and disciplines of mountain biking that are going to be included in the National Cup, well, they're basically all there. You've got XCO and XCE, then you've got marathon as well. Then you've also got gravity, enduro, downhill, and also for the first time, stage racing is going to be part of the National Series, and we think that's actually pretty cool. There are a lot of stage races happening now all the way across Australia, and so you're now going to have a National Cup winner in stage racing too. So, what about this tiered structure? Well, essentially events are going to be allocated into one of 6 different tiers. Now there are going to be criteria around those tiers. It starts at tier 3, which is your basic club level event. Tier 2 is an event with a slightly more regional focus, pulling something out of the air, like your Southeast Queensland Gravity Enduro Series. A tier 1 event is a more premium statewide event. Something that might attract some national riders from around the nation, and certainly will attract riders from across the state. So that could, for instance, be something like a Convict 100 marathon race. On top of that, you have certain marquee events that are going to be selected by MTBA to have that kind of marquee status. That might be something like Oceanias, or for instance, the Cannonball Mountain Bike Festival might have an event that reaches that marquee status. On top of that, you have state championships, and then you have national championships as the very top tier. So those tiers relate back to the point structure and how the points are going to be awarded to riders for participating in different events. Now, the way the point system works sounds complicated, but is actually pretty simple. In essence, there is a set table of points that is applied across all events, and then there is a multiplier that is given to those points depending on what tier the event is. So it's all set around tier 2 events. So if you win a tier 2 event, you get 200 points. A tier 1 event has a multiplier of 150%. So if you win a tier 1 event, you get 300 points for the win. A tier 3 event, however, has a multiplier of 50%. So you would only get 100 points for winning the tier 3 event. And that is played out across all the different levels. So marquee events get a higher multiplier, you get a higher multiplier again for state championships, and then if you win a national champs, that is the highest multiplier. So it is a pretty simple kind of system, really, even though it sounds a little bit complicated to explain. And across the course of the entire 12-month National Cup, your best 12 scores overall count. That's not your best 12 positions, but your best 12 scores, because you might, for instance, get a win in a tier 3 event, but a second place in a tier 2 event, and your score for that tier 2 event is actually going to be higher than your tier 3 event. So your best 12 scores over the course of the year count. You can do 20 races, and it's only going to be the best 12 that are going to count towards your eventual National Cup results. So if you're a club or an event promoter and you want to get involved in the National Cup, what does it cost? Well, there are fees to be involved, and we think that on the whole they are very, very reasonable. They're pretty damn affordable. It starts at $200, for instance, if you're a tier 3 event and you want to get involved in the National Cup. That gets your event listed. It means that your event is now part of that central database of points, and that people who take part in your event are contributing to their national ranking. So very, very minimal cost for a tier 3 event. Even if you're a tier 1 event, it's only $1,100 to be involved in the National Cup. So again, not prohibitively expensive, especially when you compare it to, say, running a national round in the past. If you wanted to run a national round, say for instance an XCO doubleheader, you were looking at about $16,000 to do that, and then the cost of delivering the event on top of that. So in comparison, it is a far, far cheaper way to have an event involved in national competition. So one of the questions that we had was whether or not the National Cup points were going to be contributing to World's team selections, and it turns out that yes, they will, but they are certainly not the be-all and end-all. They are part of the overall mix, and we think that's pretty fair, because a lot of top racers spend a lot of time overseas. They're not necessarily able to take part in a huge number of domestic events, but it would be ridiculous to rule them out of being part of our World's team and to penalise them for not being around to race domestically. So yes, the National Cup points are part of the mix when it comes to choosing our national team for Worlds, but they certainly aren't the only determinant. So what do you get if you do win the National Cup overall? Well, obviously there's all the lovely usual stuff like a jersey and a trophy as well. But we are likely to see some prize money and products flowing through too. MTBA are seeking sponsors at the moment for the National Cup, and we're sure that as more people come on board as sponsors, we're going to start to see more flow into the prize pool for the National Cup overall, which will be great. Overall, we think this is a really, really great move from MTBA. Clearly something had to be done the National Series was ailing, and we think this is a really, really cool solution. It's now really over to the clubs and the event promoters, as well as the general public, to get behind this idea. We think it is a real winner, and we think it has huge potential to grow participation in racing across Australia, and also help grow our talent pool, hopefully too, and help us identify young talented riders who are coming up the ranks who otherwise might have just gone unnoticed, and hopefully, you know, give us more champions on the podiums of World Cups and World Champs as well. Of course, if you have any more questions about the National Cup, please stick them in the comments below, or send us a message or an email, and we will do whatever we can to answer those for you. Of course, subscribe to our channel if you like what we do, and don't forget to watch this one down here as well while you're at it. Thanks very much. That's Flow Lounge for another week, and we'll see you next time.